My name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. This is the first indie review book I've read in 2022, so I'm really excited to get this out. I have officially been doing this for 3 years now, which is mind-blowing to me. Here's to a good 4th year. So, today I am reviewing Pinhole by Matthew Kagle. This is a sci-fi time traveler story all about a variety of time travelers and the different ways that their lives are intertwined. Now, it's told in a way that is both linear and non-linear at the exact same time. So the actual strict settings of the scenes as they move throughout the book are told in Earth's strict chronology. So the first scene is like in the prehistoric era, and then it moves to like some ancient civilizations, and then it moves into the far future. So technically, in that sense, it is linear. But because the protagonists almost all deal with some level of time travel or some level of the effects of time travel, their personal arcs are a lot more non-linear. They move around in weird ways. So it's very interesting to see that much. And in general, the good news is that there was a lot of really intriguing sci-fi concepts. The bad news is there was a lot of really intriguing sci-fi concepts. And that was the biggest struggle I had with the book as a whole. Because if I was to actually sit down and try to explain what the plot of this book is, you would honestly think I was talking about a short story collection, because they all seem fairly disparate. You have a time traveler that goes back in time, realizes he's stuck, so he creates this family for himself, and then realizes that his son, and in fact all of his descendants, are going to live through all of the horrors of history, and they could die out from disease, and they could suffer from other medical issues, and they could suffer from these wars. And so he decides to spend years and years of his life basically letting his life fall apart to write this giant magnum opus of everything that's going to happen as closely as he can tell, and unintentionally creates this secret society around the Book of Willius, as the ancient Greeks did not recognize Willie as a name. And that was a really cool subplot. Then there's another one where there's a guy who sends his 50-something-year-old brain back in time. It's kind of weird to explain. There's a lot of weird concepts, but he basically sends his brain bit by bit back into his 8-year-old body and essentially relives his own life with his 50-something-year-old perspective through his youth. And that was a really cool concept. I especially loved that he tried to avoid falling in love with the same woman because their marriage ends in this horrific divorce, but he still loves her, and it's like that whole, even if he's risking divorce, he has to try again. But also in living his life second with all of those memories, he also unintentionally changes things that he doesn't want to be changed, and it was a really cool idea. And you also have a Cassandra, who, of course, being named Cassandra, is constantly trying to go back to the past and warn people about things that are happening in the future, but discovers that she can't really change anything, and she doesn't understand why. And you have multiple different characters who create different time travel sci-fi technology that then become twisted with power or whatever. And you have a cult that connects people together using wormholes to benefit the cult leader. There's so much stuff, but there's so much stuff. Any one of those things I just named could be its own entire book in itself, and I would read any of those books. I mean, Mitchell especially, the 50-something that sent his mind back to his 8-year-old body. I would read a book where you literally follow him reliving his life, unintentionally changing things, realizing that as much as some things sucked, in changing those things that sucked, he also lost something. I would read a whole book. I would read a whole book with that concept of you really can't relive your life twice type of idea. I would read a whole book all about the Book of Willius and the unintentional, far-reaching effects of one time traveler getting stuck in time. Any one of these ideas, I would have read a whole book on. The problem is that all of them are shoved into one 300-page book. And as a result, as things went on, I started seeing it less as a whole novel and more as kind of like a series of short stories that were all connected. Because while there were cool ideas and cool character concepts and cool character arcs in theory, they all got so little time. There were also entire subplots that were began and ended within only a couple chapters within the book. And so it was like, no, you could have taken that person escaping the cult that uses wormholes to keep people together. You could have taken that singular storyline and made it an entire book. You could, like, any one of these gigantic storylines could have been their own book. So to have them all together made it feel really crowded. Now, this isn't to say that they were all entirely disparate. In a lot of cases, the secret society might pop up in one of the stories, or this one character might go on to marry this character in this timeline and have an effect on that subplot. But for the most part, it almost felt like Easter eggs between the stories rather than, yes, it really, really mattered that the widow of this character marries this character and therefore carries it on. Like, that really, really matters. It didn't really. It felt like an Easter egg. You could have switched entirely and gone to an entirely different character marrying that character, and it would have been the same outcome. It didn't really matter that it was that character from that previous subplot coming in, which is why, again, I say it feels more like a short story collection. I did appreciate that there were a lot of queer characters involved in this. The big time traveler that went back in time was bisexual. We had one of the futuristic reporter people was, I believe, lesbian, and you had a bunch of fun stuff like that that was all just very accepted and normalized, which is always nice. I definitely do. I'm starting to expect more queerness in books. Like, it's getting to the point where the idea of it, like, making it a special separate thing, it doesn't make any sense. Most marginalized identities should in some way be involved in books just regularly. That would just be nice. So in that way, I liked it. And I liked a lot of the sci-fi concepts in concept. Granted, whenever sci-fi books try to give the long, drawn-out explanation, I kind of just gloss over. Like, yeah, sometimes they have an effect on the plot, and I appreciate that. But for the most part, all I need to know is the machine does this. You don't need to tell me why. And if you do, I'm not going to remember. Or I guess, like, the why of the machine counts in the way of, oh, how do we destroy this machine? How do we stop it working? Or, oh, no, it's not working. How do we make it work? Like, those kind of plot lines. But generally speaking, I never really pay that much attention when sci-fi books get really into the science of it. Well, quote unquote science. Most of the time it's based on a fictionalized version of science, hence why science fiction. But that part was kind of whatever for me. But again, even if you like that kind of thing, there's a lot of it and a lot of explanations. And again, they had to keep moving the story forward because it's only 300 pages, and so you get like a quick explanation, maybe like a couple paragraphs where you're supposed to understand how this works, and then it moves on. It's like, like, maybe not. So, in general, I do still think this book is worth reading just for the concepts alone. There were a lot of interesting moral dilemmas of how would a trial system, a court system work when you could look into the past and see what happened, or you could predict what was going to happen next. Like, if you murder someone before they commit murder, have you solved the murder or have you committed murder? Like, that kind of that's a little bit more of a traditional trope in a lot of these time travel stories. Other books have taken on it, but I always love that. And then there was the whole idea of how much we rely on people with patents and stuff, and how those patents can be stolen or retaken and affected. And there were also a lot of really, really big emotional beats, cheating affairs or falling in love and that kind of stuff. But again, because there wasn't a lot of room for all of it, I didn't feel it. Like, when the big plot of, oh God, beats happened, I was like, because I had maybe 4 other scenes with that couple beforehand, if that, maybe less. So like the declarations of love or the falling out of that romance didn't hit because it just didn't have time to grow so that the reader would care about it. And it's also weird to me because this is not the first book I've read of Matthew Kagle. I read his Loom of Sorrows duology, and while yes, that book also deals with nonlinear storylines, that book was in essence a character study. It was literally looking at both a character in the quote-unquote modern era of that book and looking at what was essentially a folk hero of the before times in 2 separate storylines and how they converged and why the folk hero did what he did and how that affects the modern day. Like, it was really deep in depth on these very small circle of characters. So I'm not sure if the author wanted to go for a bigger cast and maybe just bit off a little bit more than he could chew. I do think that it is worth the read for the sci-fi concepts alone. I really do like a lot of the plot concepts as well. Like, if you were just to write out the plot concepts of, there's a book with this in it, I would be invested. It was just too much of it all at once for anything to hit. And to prove how much of it there was and how confusing it got, at the end of the book, there's actually an appendix that literally, like, lays out each quote-unquote main character's arc, because there's several of them, and it all depends on what you consider a main character. Like, yes, Cassandra and Willie and Mitchell would all definitely be main characters, but, like, would the person that was the focal point of a subplot that was only in existence for a couple chapters be considered one of the main characters? Like, again, it's all up in the air, but there's literally an appendix just to lay out how it all works. So I would still be interested in reading more of this author going forward. However, for this book, I gave it 3 stars. Great idea for the concepts, and I think it could get, like, if you're a creative person, it could probably inspire something. It could probably make you lost in thought of, oh, what if our world was like that? What would happen? But for the actual emotional beats, the actual plot themselves, they fell a little flat overall just because none of them had time to develop. And moving forward, I would love to see more books from this author that has a smaller cast of characters with fewer concepts that are more explored rather than a listing of a bunch of stuff that's all loosely interconnected in one world. But overall, if you're a sci-fi fan, I still think you'll like this one. Definitely not for beginners, though. I am open to review requests. Hopefully I'm going to keep it going. I should have expected my list to double the minute I opened. I don't know why I didn't, but I'm going to, fingers crossed, try my best to not have to close again this year. Really going to try. But with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.